Um, Great, here we go. So I suppose you could go ahead and advance to the first slide. Um, Great. So I am just briefly going to go over some background information about House Bill 2992, the changes that bill created, and then a little bit about where we are with implementation, and then I'll hand off to my colleagues who will share some more details about implementation and just some of the nuts and bolts. For those of you who haven't heard about this, so House Bill 2992 passed in the 2021 session and went into effect in October of that year. The intention of that bill was to promote equity and remove barriers to public participation in state government, and specifically in boards and commissions. And so that bill made changes to the state law, which authorizes certain board and commission members to receive compensation and expense reimbursement for the work that they do with boards and commissions. And so it did a couple of things. One, it increased the amount of compensation paid. The previous amount was set at $30, and it had been that way since the 80s. And so people felt that that amount needed to be updated. But then it also made changes to who qualified for those payments. Next, please. And so there are a couple of things to know about how to implement those changes. So one of the things that you need to do is determine the eligibility of your members according to the type of board or commission you're supporting. And so I'm not going to read this whole chart out to you. It is available online. We'll share links to those resources later. But in summary, qualified members, and I'll say more about this later, but qualified members are eligible for the per diem compensation and for reimbursement of expenses. Non-qualified members are sometimes eligible and sometimes not, and it partly depends on the type of board or commission that you're working with and how it was formed. Yeah, I won't go into so much detail. We only have an hour today, so I want to be mindful of the time. But again, these resources are available online, so you can kind of look at those details. And I will say a little more about the qualified and non-qualified members next. And so once you've determined the type of board you've got, how it was formed, then you want to look at determining the eligibility of your individual members. And so the way we do this is we ask each board and commission member to complete a self-attestation form. And so in that form, they fill out their information, and then they self-identify as either a qualified member or non-qualified member. And then board and commission members may also, using the same form, may also indicate that they're declining compensation. And there are a number of reasons folks might do that, which I'll say more about in a minute. Um, but in order to receive compensation, the member must not be in full-time public service, and that is defined quite specifically. It's basically full-time government work, so state, local, regional, federal government, including our public university system. It does not include employees of tribal governments. So they must not be in full-time public service, and they must also be either a qualified member, as defined by law, or a non-qualified member where they are specifically authorized by law to receive compensation, and that's subject to availability of funds. Next, please. So, who are qualified members? Qualified members are members who have an adjusted gross income according to their previous year's tax return of less than $50,000, unless they're filing jointly, and then it must be less than $100,000. One thing that it's important for folks to know is that compensation received may be considered taxable income, and so it can impact a member's eligibility for different means tested benefit programs. And again, any member may choose to decline compensation. And the most typical reasons that people decline to be compensated, even if they're eligible, is they don't want to impact their eligibility for different programs, or if they are public employees, they are not allowed to receive that money. Next, please. Non-qualified members. So non-qualified members are those who do not meet the definition of a qualified member. As I said earlier, in some cases, non-qualified members can still be compensated. Um, but there must be another law outside of ORS 292495, which is the law that defines all of this. There must be another law outside of that that authorizes the non-qualified members to be compensated. And so I've put an example here from the Board of Pharmacy. This is the example of what that would look like. So in this statute related to the Board of Pharmacy, it says that members of that board are entitled to compensation and expenses as provided in ORS 292495. And it also states in this case that the board could choose to provide compensation that's greater than that rate if they chose to do so. So this is an example of what that can look like. Next, please. So, so this is some more information about payments to qualified members. So according to the state law, qualified members are entitled to compensation that's equal to the per diem that is paid to members of our state legislature. That amount is tied in turn to the federal per diem rates. And so as of October 1st of this year, that total amount is $178 per day. That amount is paid to qualified members for each day or portion of a day in which they perform their official duties. And this amount must be paid regardless of budget. And again, members are free to choose to decline that compensation if they wish. Next, please. So the next question people will often ask is, well, what constitutes the performance of official duties? And they also will ask, what duties are able to be compensated? And they will also ask, how much time does the member have to spend doing those things? And so that will, so I'll say a bit more about that. So the performance of official duties means the member is performing the assigned tasks that are necessary to fulfill their responsibilities as a member of that board or commission. So that can be a lot of things. One of the more obvious things would be attending official meetings of the board or commission, but it also includes things like preparing for a meeting, reading materials in advance of a meeting, or preparing a report that they're going to give out to the full group during a meeting. It can include travel to and from, things like that. In terms of the amount of time spent, as I said earlier, members are paid, it's a daily rate. It's not prorated. It's just if they perform their official duties for that day or a portion of that day, they are then eligible to receive that per diem compensation. And so the guidance that we do have is that performing a task for a minimal amount of time does not qualify for compensation, where minimal is defined as maybe 5 to 10 minutes. So the example that we tend to give is that, if someone spends a few minutes reading and responding to an email, or, makes a 2-minute phone call, something like that, that would not qualify for compensation. But that beyond that, it's really up to the discretion of the board member. And so what we have said as a best practice would be, the people who establish the boards and commissions, the staff that support the boards and commissions, you all have the ability to um, create some guidelines and set some parameters and define what constitutes official duties for your board or commission. And so a best practice might be to adopt rules, bylaws, or some sort of policy that provides guidance to the members on what constitutes official business or official duties and the estimated time commitment for those duties. And one thing I always like to point out when I talk about this is that when you start talking about time commitments, you will want to keep in mind that some folks, for disability reasons or other individual needs, may need more time to perform a task, may need to spread a task out over a couple of days. So, do be sure that you are accommodating people's needs in that way as you're creating these guidelines. Next, please. Just a word about expense reimbursement. Expense reimbursement is separate from and can be paid in addition to the per diem compensation that members may receive. And so these are two different things. And I think because it's often referred to as per diem compensation, and our travel allowances, as state employees is often called a per diem, that can people can get confused, but they are separate. And so um, as far as expense reimbursement goes, qualified members are also eligible to receive reimbursement for their actual and necessary expenses incurred in the performance of their official duties. Other members, unless otherwise provided by law, and whether or not they're eligible for that per diem compensation, are also eligible to receive reimbursement for their expenses incurred in the performance of their official duties. And of course, in all cases, this is subject to the limits established by law and by DAS policies. Next, please. I wanted to say something about tax withholding. So members of boards and commissions that are created by statute that are in state law, those members are considered employees for federal tax purposes. And so they need to be entered into Workday as board members. And we'll hear more about that, more detail about that later. Next, please. Members of boards and commissions that are formed by an agency head, so not in state law, but the agency head has created this body. These folks may or may not be considered employees for federal tax purposes. And so DAS has created some questions to ask to help you determine what the status of the board members are. So the first question is, does this body meet on a regular basis? The second question is, do members receive an orientation, a handbook, charter, bylaws, and similar onboarding materials? And does the body anticipate that its work will last for more than 4 months? Or if the group has been around for a while, has it already lasted for more than 4 months? Next, please. And so if the answer to all three of these questions is no, then the individuals will not be entered into Workday as employees, and then their compensation is reportable on a 1099 NEC, provided that the money they receive totals more than $600 during the calendar year. If the answer to all three questions is yes, then the members are entered into Workday as contingent workers, and then their compensation is subject to the federal and state taxes. And if the answer to some questions is yes and some questions is no, that's something then that has to be assessed on a case-by-case basis, and we recommend that you consult with your DOJ counsel for assistance. Next, please. Just a word about volunteers. Volunteers are an important part of our state system as well. And the informal recognition of their service is separate from the issue of compensation and expense reimbursement under state law. And we know that it's a relatively common practice for agencies to offer gift cards or other tokens of appreciation to community members for their participation in discussions, focus groups, and similar activities. And this, again, this is separate from the compensation that folks receive under the state law. And so in these cases, it's up to the individual determination of the agency whether or not a body has the authority to spend its money in this way for these gestures of appreciation. And agencies should be aware of the tax implications when a member or an individual member receives more than $600 in a calendar year. And again, if you need further guidance around this issue, we recommend that you consult with your financial office in your agency and or with your DOJ attorneys for further guidance. Okay, that will be the end of my part. I don't know if you want me to pause here for questions or do you want to wait till the end, Carol?
Let's wait till the end. And I see there is a question in the chat that
That's
hopefully we'll be able to answer here in the upcoming slides. So since this is a lot of information, and we do have a lot of agencies who have non-statutorily formed boards and commissions and are trying to figure out how do they set them up? Do they receive compensation? Do they not? We've developed some tools and resources for these agencies and for you if needed. And so we have created a website. We'll put the link in the chat. To help you. What we did is we just kind of broke down each of the different things that Brandy's talked about and laid it out in hopefully a way that would make it easy for you to answer different questions to see who is determined for our compensation and expenses. So as Brandy talked about, there are different ways that these bodies can be formed. They can be formed under a statute, They can be formed under specific statutory authority delegated to the agency head. So the legislature may say they would like this group formed under this agency, or under the agency's general enabling statutes, which means, the agency head could say, you know what, I think this would be a great idea if we put this body together to help us do our work. And these definitions are all on the website. So full-time public service, which Brandy described, is full-time employment with any public body within the state of Oregon, and it lists some other governmental entities. And then there's also the lucrative office, and this is, Brandy could speak more to this if there are questions, but there is a 5-point test to determine if something is a lucrative office. So, and to help when Brandy was talking about, does it have this question? How is it formed? Does it have a charter? Does it have all of these different things to help you understand what type of group it is and if the members fall to be compensated or not? We've completed this group establishment form. And so if you kind of answer all the questions as you go through that will help determine if their time is compensable and if it's taxable. So here's the definition of non-qualified and qualified members, and it's the definition for these under each of the different types of groups can be formed. And I'm not going to read it all, but we'll definitely we have this available to you. And then once you determine if somebody is eligible for compensation, then you'll need to determine if that compensation is taxable. And so we've created this document that will help you understand if they are taxable, which means that they are considered an employee and need to be entered into Workday as a board and commission member. And when Brandy was talking about the 3 questions that we've developed to be asked, we put this in a chart here to help with that determination. So resources on the website, we have definitions, we have document about volunteer recognition and support, and the FAQ is not up yet, but hopefully will be up very soon. So my portion here is just more general information about what we have on the website. Just some things to remember that, as Brandy stated, that if they're eligible for compensation, then they must be compensated and paid within the agency's budget. When you're creating your bodies, you get to determine what the official duties are. And so if you're creating that group establishment form or completing it, there's a section there where you can determine and document what those official duties are so that the people on those bodies know that when they're performing those are what, and they're doing it for a portion of the day, then that's what they can be, when they can be compensated, sorry. Please remember that members entered in the Workday must take the discrimination and harassment-free workplace training, and that the self-attestation form is completed once a year, and it's based on the previous year's tax income. And Brandy, I know the other day you talked about having the form be either available for the next year in May once April 15th has passed. Am I remembering that correctly?
Yes, I meant to say that earlier. Yes, so when board members are first appointed, we send them the self-attestation form. So, and ask them to give that to you. So they and that the board staff, board administrators all ask the members to update those forms in May of every year, because then that gives them a chance to have the most updated information after tax season.
Thank you. So if they're not eligible for compensation under the 292-495, any remuneration they receive is paid through the state financial system. So that goes through your accounting department. And if they receive I can't speak today. If it's more than $600 in the year, then that money will be reported to the IRS and they'll receive a 1099 NEC. And so now we're getting to the workday part. I think before we get to the workday part, let's answer some questions that are in the chat. And I see there's a question about what is considered to be a qualified member. I will get that. Brandy, do you see the question? Does each program in a government agency that works with external committees and boards need to develop a document on what constitute official duties?
That's the practice that we recommend, because it seems that folks do better when they have some guidelines, and it doesn't need to be super detailed and it doesn't need to be, really specific. But even if you just have some general, like a general list that says, here are things we consider official duties, if there are other things that you need to do, maybe come and have it approved first or discuss it with us. So you can even leave it a little open-ended in that way, but we recommend that you at least have a framework for people to operate within.
And I'm putting in the chat the link to the document that shows how to determine when members are qualified or not for compensation. And then we will also put in the criteria that's on the self-attestation form to show if they are eligible based on the type of group that they fall under, then when they can receive compensation. Brandy, Mary Beth says the majority of my board members are not qualified. My budget is not able to support paying qualified members with the same as non-qualified. What is the minimum I can pay my not qualified members?
I'm going to have to get some more information about that and get back to you. That's a new question for me. So I'll make a note of that. Thank you.
I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm not sure how to pronounce your name. Could you pronounce it for me?
Sure, it's Krasimir.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Carol. I was going to type it up in the chat, but I'll just ask the question. Thank you for answering my question about the official duties. That's very helpful. Still, I'm not clear on what really is what are the criteria for considering a member a qualified or non-qualified. The table you presented is, it explains about the reimbursements and whether they're eligible for those and per diems, but I don't think that's the definition that I'm looking for. There's got to be some criteria that distinguishes what, who can be termed qualified and not qualified. So do you have that somewhere that I can look it up? It has to be, official member is a member who blah, 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 blah. And it states a criteria that they need to meet to be a qualified member. Does that make sense?
Yes. So let me put in here.
That
and
does.
I know I'm just, go ahead, Brandy.
No, please go ahead. Sounds like you have it under control.
I was thinking you had a slide on this from previous presentations. But we do have the document, or that we do have a definition of a qualified member here in our definitions. And then here's the actual definition. So once you determine if the type of board that you have is eligible to have qualified members, then you go down to this next definition of a qualified to see if they meet this criteria.
So it's income-based, basically. So it's income-based. Okay, great. Thank you. That's really helpful. And my next question is, and I'm sorry to kind of stall the presentation, but the threshold, I work for the Equity and Inclusion Division at OHA, and we've been having really a lot of really heated conversation about the threshold of $50,000, because what we realized is to attract experts in, for example, in our case, in health equity, 50,000 really disqualifies a lot of high-level experts that really would like to share their knowledge and expertise with us and be part of our committees and boards. However, they get paid at their organizations much more than 50,000. So for us, we were really the big issue is that we cannot really attract experts for some of the committees because of that threshold. People are not willing to come and contribute for $178 when they get paid at their organizations, much more. And it's become really difficult to source experts. Any recommendations around that? If you have, that'd be very, very helpful.
Yeah. Thank you, Brandy. Do you have?
Yeah,
any
I mean, I
thoughts?
think I do. I appreciate you sharing that. That is a concern and an issue that I've heard brought up before. And it is one of the issues that it's one of the concerns that some folks have about the way the law is currently. Um, and that is the current law. So what I would say is that I appreciate you sharing that. I've heard that concern before, and I am very interested in the concerns and challenges that people are facing with the current law and with House Bill 2992 in particular. And so I would welcome any of that input that any of you all have. So, and it would be interesting also to talk to you individually and hear a little more about what you're saying, maybe offline. So I can reach out to you separately and maybe we can have more of a conversation. But at this stage, we don't really have specific recommendations because this is the law and then the requirements that are in place.
No, I understand that. I mean, yeah. And are there any plans for the law to be changed in the future for some of the feedback that you've collected from all the agencies in Oregon and all the programs for that to be amended somehow? Is there any plan for that? Do you have a sense?
I'm not aware of a plan at this time. I would say that, I do hear a lot of concerns, and so I know that there are a lot of folks out there that are thinking about these issues and these challenges, but at this time, I'm not aware of a specific plan to make changes.
Thank you so much.
Terrence?
Hey, this is Terrence Saunders, Executive Director for the Oregon Advocacy Commission's Office. And I just have a question in regards to item number 3 that's on your screen, where the question is, what if members entered into Workday, or what if we have members entered into Workday who should not be receiving compensation? So I just have a clarifying question because a good portion of my folks, we have 44 commissioners. 36 of them could qualify for payment. However, most of them don't actually accept any payment or qualify. So do I take them out of Workday, or is there a caveat because they're governor appointed and need to be entered into Workday? Just wanted to clarify that.
Thank you. I'm going to go out on a limb. Brandy, correct me. I think if they're governor appointed board and commission members, that they should be in Workday, and then they just would not have the compensation in there.
Perfect. That's my understanding
correct.
too. I just wanted to make sure.
Thank you. And thank you. That's good feedback for them. The question that we need to make it specific to non-governor appointed. Mary Beth?
Yeah, hi. So the comment before that last comment, right, where he was talking about how because there's a $50,000 threshold and his experts, right, make more than $50,000, what can he pay them? My question is kind of the same as that, but the reverse, right? And so this is where I'm losing the plot, where my understanding was that if you made over 50,000 individually or over 100,000 individual or joint, you were not qualified and therefore did not have to follow the statutory amount if your budget couldn't support it. But so his question was, well, what do I do about people who make more than $50,000? Doesn't he have a choice to pay them? And in the reverse, do I have the choice not to pay them? That's where I'm just completely confused by this whole thing.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying now. So if your members are qualified members, so they're not public employees and they meet that income threshold, then if they request compensation, they must be paid regardless of budget. If your members are non-qualified, so they aren't were in public employment, but they also don't meet the income threshold, right? So they're non-qualified members. Those members may only be paid if there is a separate law that authorizes them to be paid. So if within your board's enabling statutes or in your board statutes, there's a component that says, you know, members may be paid, non-qualified members may be paid in excess of or in addition to, or so, you know, so it has to be specifically authorized. Otherwise, it's not permitted to pay them.
Okay, so just want to make sure I'm understanding this. So 6 out of my 7 members are not qualified. They make above the threshold, above $100,000. And my budget cannot support the 180 for prep and 180 for the day meeting. My statute says that they will be compensated, and our rule says they'll be compensated to whatever DAS sets the standard as, right? Whatever this ORS, whatever I have in the rule. So at this point, I don't have to pay the non-qualified members the 180 that's set by the statute. I do not have to pay them the same as the non-qualified.
That's correct. So qualified members must be paid regardless of budget. Non-qualified members, it is subject to budget. So if you do not have the funds to pay the non-qualified members, you're not required to do so.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. That's what I needed to know. That's what my question was in the chat. Sorry, I wasn't clear. Thank you.
Go ahead, Terrence.
And just to build on that last comment, just another follow-up. So what happens, so each commission, we generally have a budget of $6,641. What happens in the event that a commission runs out of funds that would normally be paying for the reimbursement for folks that do qualify for that $178 per day, but there's no funding left in that particular budget? Are we required as an agency to continue to pay for those requests when they come out of the agency funds, even though it may be taking monies that is appropriate for particular use in the future? Does that make sense?
It does make sense. And, you know, the way the law is written, qualified members, if they request compensation, must be paid regardless of budget. And that does come out of agency funds. And so, you know, I'd recommend if you find yourself in that situation that you consult with your financial folks. In your case, being a small board, you would consult with your support folks at DAS and try to figure out a solution. And that's kind of the best we have at this point, the way the law currently stands.
Yeah, and just a little bit more information. So we created an official duties policy where it mentions in our policy around compensation and reimbursement, and it's subject to availability of agency funds for each commission voted on it and approved the kind of policy, or at least 3 out of 4 commissions have. In that event, we've gone through the DOJ process, and they did mention that we don't necessarily have to pay because they approved kind of our internal agency policy listing out that very detail. So just wanting to mention that as well in case of other folks who may be struggling and don't have enough monies to pay for everybody to receive that compensation. That may be an option to create an official policy.
So I'll admit I was multitasking, so I didn't hear the question. There's a comment.
I think Terrence was offering a comment and some
Thank you.
information for some other folks.
Thank you. Okay, so next we have Missy and Sherry to talk about the actual workday process. And it would, I think, well, I'm going to let Missy talk about who is responsible for putting this information in Workday. And then Missy, do you want me to stop sharing my screen?
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Hello, Missy Wagers again. And so we're gonna show a demo, but a lot of this really is gonna be the responsibility of your HR staff. It's gonna be your HR partners that are handling the union memberships of the board members and the position representation, organization assignments, things like that. So this really is aimed at kind of the internal pieces of the supervisory org and managing the positions, but it still is very important. So we want to make sure it's recorded and then go back and be shared with those that are actually going to be the ones doing the work within the system. So I am going to share my screen. And I'm also going to share, we have a QRG in Workday that has the essentially step-by-step of what needs to happen for either when you have a board or commission that's agency specific already in Workday, or as we know, many more are coming on board as we continue to kind of just expand state government. And so information on how to create the new one and how to set it up. So what I'm showing for sake of time is one that was in the system already, and we just made a few changes to it to use it for a demo. And so we'll use this as the update existing. So the first thing that needs to happen is that group establishment document that Brandy talked about earlier. That's going to walk you through determining the correct position representation for your board and commission. And when I say board and commission, I want to be really clear that what we're talking about is board and commissions that are under the purview of the agency. These are not the official boards and commissions under the Governor's Executive Appointments Office. Those are all identified with the parentheses official board at the end of their supervisory org title. These are all ones that live within the agency and are managed by the agency specifically. Excuse me, my voice is deciding to say bye-bye. Okay, so one of the first things that needs to happen, and actually we have our little test subject, Betty White, down here. So we are going to say in this situation, we went through the group establishment form and we determined that the correct representation is agency member appointed under statute delegating authority. So the first thing that needs to happen is we need to go into the position and to the organization assignments. As you see right here, so currently it says not applicable, not applicable. So we need to identify what the correct representation is. So we will go into here, change organization assignments. This will make it the first of the month. And then here it would be changing it to the correct one that was determined on that group establishment form. And then we'll want to change this to board member. And then make any documentation, however, as determined by group establishment form. So that changes it here on the organization assignments for the position restrictions. It'll also need to update the default compensation assigned to the position, because this is actually for the board and commission member. That's the official board and commission one. So we need to make it match the new representation that we just entered. And so also the HR partner and comp partner, I believe, can do these roles or these changes, sorry. So we would go and change this, and we've identified in the QRG what the codes are. And on each of these, I would put the notes in there that it's, you know, based on the group establishment form is why you're making the change. Just again, for time's sake, I'm gonna try and move along. So then the position itself is done. It should look fine now. It's got the right representation. It's got the right default compensation on it. But now this one happens to be a filled position. We have Miss Betty White is the current incumbent here. And so there's a few things that need to happen for the board member themselves. You can see that the union representation is the board and commission member, which will need to change. And so the HR partner would go to, you know, manage the union membership, and we need to end the current union. And we'll go ahead and end that 11/30 since we're making it effective 12/1. And then add a new one. And we will put, it was this one right here, under statute delegating authority to the agency. And we start at 12/1. Related to their position. Okay, so we've now updated Betty White's union membership. So now she's showing under the correct representation and union. And then there will also need to be an update to the compensation. Because currently any existing ones that are under these agency specific ones need to have their compensation changed as well. So we will request a compensation change effective 12/1. And we will make a correction. And then similar to the default comp on the position restrictions, you're going to change it. Now, here's also where if you determine, you know, they are qualified to receive the stipend, you could make that change at the same time. Add it, change it. You know, this is clearly old. It's based on the old law. I'm going to. So this went somewhere into the. Let me stop sharing really fast. It went into the agency, and I am not a comp partner for the agency. So let me just go ahead and I'm going to get that approved, and we'll get the compensation updated for the worker. Any questions so far? I know this is probably not a lot of what you guys have seen, kind of the inner workings. Okay, actually, I'm stuck. I can't go any further because the next person up to approve is a protected worker partner, so I'm not able to go in as them. So let me go back. And let's see what what else may need to be done for Betty White here. There again. Okay, so the compensation changes in the works. And then the other thing that we do want to do is just make sure when looking at the position, which is associated with the worker, that their location which should be exempt from mass transit, which it is. We would want this to update. Employee type would be limited duration, and the reason that we want limited duration is because then it'll put an end date, and if you're tracking appointment terms, like stop and starts, you'll need those dates to do that. And then it should be part-time, which it is. So those are the updates that you would want to make. Those are listed in that QRG, essentially step by step of what we just went through. Now, and I see that there's a question about who makes those changes, and yes, it's going to be HR partners and comp partners that will be making these changes. And then, you know, when you have to create a new board or commission, creating it from the ground up actually is, I mean, it's a lot of work to do it and creating the positions, but it's creating it with the right representation. It's creating the positions, they'll come out correctly with the right, default compensation. All that will just kind of, automatically happen because the soup org is set up that way versus the ones that are existing that need to be corrected. And so when I say that, any existing agency specific boards and commissions that you have now that are live in Workday, we are happy to help walk through getting some of these updated. So if your HR folks need any assistance, have them submit a case, and we'll be happy to get them rolling on making these corrections. And adding newborn members is essentially just the same as a regular recruitment. You can either, if you already have members identified, you can have your HR partner or recruiter get them added to a rec, hired to the position. You also have the ability, if you want to put something out there for the world and say, hey, this is the kind of expertise or specialty we're looking for to serve on this board or commission. You could start maybe an evergreen out there for people that are interested. And so this just walks through the hire process and what needs to happen for these board members, which the recruiters and HR partners should know very, very well. So as far as the Workday piece, I know that was pretty quick, but is there any questions? I will let Brandy take that one from Anne.
Brandy, the question is, the Board of Psychology board members have a 3-year term. As part of their onboarding, they fill out the self-attestation form. Are they informed then that they will need to fill it out every year? Or will the form default to the original form for each year after each year of their term?
So we would ask the board, you all ask the board administrators or staff to, revisit this each May. So you would want to give your board members reminders so that they can to be updated each year.
Thank you. So the Workday QRG is available in Workday, also on our Hospital 2992 website for those HR partners or comp partners who will be completing these actions for your agencies. And the only thing we're talking about board admin partners that I think it's important to just talk about real quick is to make sure that the board members who will be receiving compensation have completed their I-9 and completed it within the 3 days of their start date. They're still required, since they're determined to be employees by the federal government when they receive this compensation, that we do absolutely need to have those I-9s completed. With that, are there any other questions? Or any other information to share, Brandy or Missy or Sherry? Okay, so thank you. Hope. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, I don't have anything else. Just one more little plug that if your HR shops need help, just reach out to us. We're happy to assist.
Thank you. Okay.
Yes, I was going to add, folks, please feel free to reach out to me directly if you have questions. And I know there's a couple folks I was going to follow up with after this. So I'm always glad to help where I can. So please don't hesitate to contact me if you need to.
Great. And then as the CHRO part, if there's resources that we can help add to our website that would be helpful to you, let us know. But with that, we hope this is helpful for you to know and have the resources within your agencies to establish the groups and determine if they're compensated or not and if they're qualified members or not. So thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.